Welcome to this Barbican Press event, an extremely special event because it is the launch of Disnaeland by D.D. Johnston, which I think is going to be a tome that changes the course of the literature and the way books, particularly Scottish literature, is going. I've known Mike Johnston, D.D. Johnston, for quite a few years now. He actually spurred Barbican Press into being. I was his PhD examiner at a novel that became the first fiction that we published at Barbican Press, the deconstruction of Professor Thrub. It is wildly, brazenly, eccentrically good. And Mike actually wrote it to be unpublishable, which sets the standards, set the bar for Barbican Press. That was his second novel. His first was Peace, Love, and Petrol Bombs, which gives you something of the flavor of Mike. It was set in the fictional town of Dunjul in Scotland, which Disneyland very artfully revisits. After that came The Secret Baby Room, which we were also delighted to publish, which is a mystery thriller set in an estate in Manchester. And now he's gone full tilt back to Scotland. This is a magnificently Scottish book. It's also a universal book. And I'm delighted to have the chance to introduce this event and its extra Scottish element, which is Brian Lavery, who's another wonderful Barbican Press author and a great man and writer in himself. He's published 2 books of the fishing industry and great dramas out at sea, The Headscarf Revolutionaries and The Luckiest 13. Some wonderful fiction set in Scotland as well. You'll hear his voice comes out of Glasgow, where Mike D.D. Johnston's voice is coming out of Edinburgh. And he's also working on his next novel, which we're looking forward to publish in the foreseeable future. So it's my great pleasure to cast you into the hands of Brian, who's going to introduce you to the book and to D.D. Johnston. At the end of it all, my colleague George Biggs, who's hosting this, will be opening it up to questions. Relax and enjoy what I think is going to be a scintillating, bright, impassioned, engaged conversation that gets us into what literature can be about and what literature can touch and how it can affect the world we're living in. This book, I read it at the end, it broke me up completely. And then there's an epilogue, it broke me up again. It's one of these books that turns you inside out and makes you rethink the world. And then I did it very carefully. I knew what was happening then. I worked it in the next draft. And the same thing happened to me at the end. It is an incredibly powerful and moving book. I urge you to read it and to buy it and enjoy it and review it. But first of all, relax and please and enjoy Brian and Mike in conversation. Enjoy.
Right. Okay, I hope you can all hear me there. Hello. Well, just before I came onto this screen tonight, a J.D. Salinger quote went through my mind. And Salinger said, wouldn't it be swell if you'd read a great book and you could just get on the phone and phone the guy who wrote it like he was your best friend? Well, I'm lucky because we can do the 21st century version of that. And Mike is a friend of mine. You know, what Mike has produced in Disneyland is a truly outstanding book. Mike's been a colleague, publishing stablemate and a friend for a few years. We don't just share a publisher, we also share PhD supervisors. Disneyland hurt me and lifted me up at the same time. It's from its whip-smart title, its searing dialogue, its powerful narrative, its compelling story. In my opinion, this book has it all. And it won't look out of place in the pantheon of Scottish literature, modern Scottish literature. It won't look out of place on the shelf alongside Jimmy Kelman or Welsh or O'Hagan or Jeff Torrington. All of these authors came into my mind when I was watching the construction of this book unfold. And in my opinion, also wouldn't look out of place alongside the overlooked daddy of Scottish literature, Archie Hine, the guy who wrote Dear Green Place, a working class author with a bit in common with Mike and myself. This is not only just an original Scots voice. It's a true Scots voice. It's spoken with authenticity. Da Vinci said originality is art. This, my friends, it's a work of art. A work of art. Mike, you've landed us with a great book. And I'm not much into the Mystic Meg stuff, but I predict this is going to be one of the greats. And if it isn't, there's something wrong with a lot of you. Make it so, as they say in Star Trek. It's not just one of the best Scottish books I've read. It's just one of the best books I've read. And the reviewers agree. From the Financial Times to the Morning Star. And that's getting some great minds coming together, as it not. One of the reviewers, Mike, said you were a Doric Douglas Adams. And I thought, yeah, okay, I can see that. But when I was reading this book with its prophecies, I think you're more of a Celtic Cassandra. But the difference is, of course, is that Cassandra was never believed. That was her curse, of course, he was never believed. But I believed this book. I felt complete belief in the revelations that were made from scratch. And you know the way comedians say, it's funny because it's true. Well, this is terrifying because it was true. It's millimeters away from where we are. And as I said earlier when I was speaking to you, I was watching the Sky News as I was flicking through my notes for this. And it reinforced to me how close we are to the alternate realities that unfold in this remarkable book. And I just wondered if you'd like to speak to that for me, Mike, and tell us a wee bit more, maybe read a wee bit to support your insight.
Oh man, cheers, Brian. Thank you very, very much. I'm very touched and grateful for what you said and for what Martin said. It's very, very kind. And a huge thank you also to everyone who's been here, especially on this exceptionally hot summer's night. I suppose we should say that for anyone who's watching the recording, that we're in another heat wave. And I think it's, it's been like 38 in London. I think it's 36 here in Cheltenham. I think it's hit a balmy 14 in Edinburgh. So it's tops off time. But I welcome, it's very, very, very kind for you all to be here. And that thing, Brian, about the Celtic Cassandra, I like that. That could be my new Twitter profile. But it's weird because when I was writing it, one of the reasons I wanted it to be in a parallel world, a world that was a wee bit like ours, but just a wee bit different, was partly because my Scotland is always going to be a wee bit removed with Scotland, because I've been away from Scotland for more than 20 years now. So it's sort of a memory and it's already a reimagining. But also, I didn't want to say that this was what I thought was going to happen, because I didn't think we were going to get to a sort of a catastrophic apocalyptic moment in 2024. And yet, every week that goes by, I start like, oh no, it's coming true. What's going on? You know, the sort of like the premise of why the book, there's a global power cut. There's a series of power cuts. There's economic problems, and this is partly to do with conflict with Russia. I suppose this was all written before the invasion of Ukraine, or certainly the recent upsurge in that conflict. So that happened. You thought, oh goodness me, that's terrible. It's also sort of inspired by the climate crisis, which we feel more and more. It's everywhere. We seem to be, you know, it's in wildfires. You feel it on your skin when you go outside. You see it in the flooding. It's happening. And then, you know, the book, there's inflation and there's recession, and of course all of this is happening, and it's frightening, and it's a wee bit hard to see happy solutions. And that's one of the things that I hope the the book does is that it says, all right, we're in crisis, but it's okay, you know, let's put the laughs back into the apocalypse. There can be hope here.
Yeah, the apocalypse, you know, it's a new style of literature, the apocalypse. Get that in the book club. But you're not just creating a world here, Mike, you know, because Dundee, it could be Glasgow, it could be Liverpool, it could be Birmingham Dool. Yeah. This isn't about the place as such, although obviously the vernacular lends it to that, but this is about class. This is, to me, the class from which we came at work, literally at work, literally at play, and in the face of a sort of crisis. You know, and even in the little details that you put in, these little details that allow you to have broader strokes. You know the names of the apps, your Jabber, Pay App, the chip shop, Lord of the Fries, you know, Ashraf's corner shop. I've been in that shop, and that's what makes me even more frightened, as it were, when I was reading it. But I also laughed out loud. And your representation of the vernacular, you know, I'm from the west coast of Scotland, as you're aware, so we don't say Ken as much as you, like, unless we're actually talking to somebody called Kenneth, right? But so this East Coast, West Coast thing, straight out of Govan, yeah. But there's a clever use of this, and I obviously unfamiliar with some of the East Coast vernacular, but I got it by the clever use of context and the sharp dialogue, and it made it sort of. It was a clarity, almost in a foreign language, as it were. So how did you? You know, were you aware as well that, you know, you can often fall into a trap when you're putting down somebody's accent and type that can make them, you know, you can fall into the "Hey you Jimmy" trap. You know,
it's a weird thing, because I agree with you totally that although it's a book set in one wee town, a fictional town, but and it's a very sort of Scottish book in that way. But you're absolutely right that it's a sort of I hope it's a sort of universal message about the potential for people to cooperate, and that could be happening just as much in Liverpool or Newcastle or wherever. With the language, there is something different about writing, whatever you want to call it. Now, I'd say this is English that uses Scots words rather than sort of the separate language that is Scots. You know, but there is a difference because, of course, Scottish was once a written language. It was a language of a nation. You know, you're going back a wee while, so 14th to 16th century or whatever. But so it has this written tradition, and we have these standard spellings to an extent, which you can draw on when you're capturing that vernacular in a way that maybe you couldn't if you were writing about other English dialects. So I think that's a luxury in a way that we have as Scottish writers, that we have this resource of the language, which I just think is wonderful, and I think it's beautiful. And I think whether you're using a wee bit of it or whether you're a real broad speaker, there's the resource is it's a beautiful language, but it's also got a strength to it.
Yeah, it's interesting to note in what the optimists call the New Scotland, that the old language has suddenly become de rigueur, you know. It's become the latest fashion, you know. But it was, as you say, it was always there. This is the way Burns spoke, the Lowland Scots, the Doric Scot. You know, this is the language of Walter Scott. You know, the language of Burns. You know, but the thing is, of course, that it got kidnapped and it got, you know, Louis Stevenson pun, it got kidnapped and it got suppressed. You know, they couldn't wear the tartan, they couldn't speak the Gaelic, and in the lowlands they couldn't talk. And then, of course, in my childhood, it was considered oh, that's slang, you can't talk properly. And you ended up with this strangulated stuff. The horrible Kelvin said, you'll have had your tea sort of bloody thing. That seems to be favoured by the Scottish weather people. You know, Scottish, they always have heather with the weather, you know. So you've managed to avoid that. But were there any other writers that you had in mind when you were looking at the use of, to whatever extent, of Scots?
I think I'm lucky that I grew up at a time that there were a lot of sort of role models for me in Scottish literature. Like, I mind when I was at school, we had to write a book review, and we got to go into the school library and choose a book. And sort of at random, I pulled out a collection of William McIlvanney stories, The Walking Wounded. And just like, I mean, like, even now I remember those stories. They were so affected me. And of course, he wrote, like a lot of Scottish writers have done, he invented a town to set this, you know. Graithnock was where he set a lot of his work. And that's probably influenced me to, you know, to invent the town of Dundoo. You know, Lewis Grassic Gibbon as well. He did something a wee bit similar. But there were a number of writers like, you know, Jim Kelman's someone I admire massively for his books, for his uncompromising literary ambition, and also for his uncompromising political stance over the years. Alistair Gray, you know, it's hugely important to me, and Irvin Welsh, you know, like, I mean, he might be a Hibs fan, but fair play. Like in Edinburgh, a lot of people read that book. You know, Trainspotting, a lot of people read that. A lot of people have maybe not read any other books that would be considered literary novels. Read that book. So there was a lot of there's a lot of inspiration to see how different writers use different forms of the language.
Yeah, I mean, it's the time that you're speaking about in your teenage years. You know, when I was a teenager, the amount of modern Scottish literature was Archie Hine. I remember finding Archie Hine, and he wrote about Dear Green Place, which of course is the Gaelic translation of Glasgow. It means the Dear Green Place, and it was a story about a guy living in a tenement trying to write a book, trying to be a writer, and giving up his job to try and do it. At the time I was reading this, I was a teenager living in a tenement, wanting to be a writer. It connected with me, and it used language that I could recognise. You bear in mind, when I was a kid, the Scottish language was discouraged. You know, there was only one Scottish actor. Gordon Jackson was the busiest Scotsman in the world. You know, he was in everything. You know, him and Sean Connery, but he had to put on a posher voice. You know, but the fact of the matter is that it's blossomed since. You know, with Irvin Welsh, with Jimmy Kelman, Jeff Torrington in Swing Hammer Swing, a novel of place. But the place that you've got here, depending, of course, on which timeline, is decaying anyway.
Aye.
So, was there any hope for Dundoo?
It is, you know, it is decaying, and again, I think that partly comes through like my memories of how Scotland was, maybe, you know, in a sort of post-industrial moment, and Dundoo sort of a place that's never really recovered for that in my mind. Was there any hope for it? You know, it's hard to find a lot of hope just now. We're in an extraordinary moment, I think, and the years that we've recently lived through with COVID, and what a shock to us all about the possibilities of life that was. I think, by the way, it's quite possible to be at the same time very worried about the virus and concerned about how it can affect people, and also to be really frightened that we've now got a precedent for everybody being sort of locked up in their homes. And then, like, on the back of that, you've got we're becoming poorer in certainly people in my generation. We lived through the 1980s, pretty grim time, right? But then from early 90s through to 2008, economically, you've got quite a good good run of things. And we sort of got used to the idea that in material terms, now whether we're getting happier or not is another question, but in material terms we're progressing, and now we're really, you know, a lot of people are really, really struggling. Where does the hope come from? And maybe that's why I turned to a sort of fantastical solution to that. Why I turned to a science fiction and the idea of an apocalyptic event, that there's going to be this rupture. You know, I got really interested in apocalyptic thinking, and the fact that in sort of Christianity and a lot of faith systems, it was something to look forward to. You know, the book of Revelation promises us the kingdom of heaven and earth. Now, a wee bit frightening, a lot of smiting, you know, all that's going on, but it was the evildoers were going to get smite, and that's, you know, I could live with that. That's not that's sort of not. But then we were going to have this wonderful time, and somewhere along the line we've lost sight of that. So now all our disaster novels are about the savagery that's going to be unleashed among people. And I wanted the book to be uplifting and to remind us that out of crisis, really good things can sometimes come.
And we saw that during the height of the pandemic, which hasn't gone away. But how quickly we forget. You know, all the changes that have been made for the common good have never been made by lawmakers. They've been made by people coming together themselves.
Right.
You know, we don't want to go all anarchic syndicalistic on them, you know, but that's empirical truth.
Uh-huh.
You know, and in the book, why I say that you know the class element's very strong. There is a part where they do, without giving too much away, but people do come together. Certain people do. Certain people don't. It's a good, like any great story. It's a good mirror. I said earlier, Mike, it was simultaneously scary and funny. And to be honest, it didn't do my anxiety a great deal of good. You know, it really didn't.
Sorry.
There was a hope as well. I believe that these guys, these young guys, they're going to save us. You know, we should have been sending the lift back down, and we pulled the bloody ladder up instead. You know, not all of us, but collectively, my generation in particular. I didn't pay to go to university the first time round. I did the second. You know, I had a grant. I benefited from the National Health Service. I benefited from education. And you can see it's all been taken away, and you see that reflected in Dundee. But also you give alternate universe, you give alternate outcomes in some stories, some people's lives. And this is where it scared me and gave me hope at the same time. This exploration of the alternate story for the same people, for the same characters. And you managed to do this without falling into the geek zone, you know. But it's obviously very well researched. How did you manage to pull that together? The alternative it did keep us engrossed with it.
There is a sense to it in terms of the timeline from which this world is supposed to have split for ours, and it's 2004, and anything that's happened since 2004 has gone a wee bit different now. So with things like, you know, Facebook doesn't, you know, some other social media thing filled that space and stuff like that. But anything that was sort of set in motion, set in course before 2004, that's stayed the same. Shall I read a wee bit?
Aye, please do.
Let me see what I read. Well, I'll read a bit about there. See, I do like this idea that there's lots of sort of parallel worlds, and that's become a very prominent thing in our culture. But because I'm also a Marxist determinist, I think that even if there are loads of parallel worlds, they're all going to end up the same anyway. So here's a wee bit about that.
Capitalism, comrade.
Right. There's mere versions of the world than all the stars in the universe multiplied by all the atoms in the earth. And new worlds are produced all the time, like cells dividing uncontrollably. But they're not quite infinite, because every world has to end. And here's the scary bit. Most worlds end around the same time, right? See, possible worlds tend to converge. Take writing. Worlds without writing to exist, right? But think how rare they are. Like, all right, you can imagine hundreds of reasons why any one group of Neolithic farmers never pressed their accounting tablets into clay, like they were struck down by pestilence, or the priests spoke out against it, or they all got peshed and forgot. But for they worlds to never develop writing, something had to keep preventing every group of farmers from discovering this logical innovation again and again, not just throughout Mesopotamia, but in China, Egypt, Mesoamerica, the Indus Valley, and anywhere else with agriculture. It's like tossing a coin billions of times and always getting heads. But think about it like this. In many worlds, a B. Sheng wasn't born in Hubei in 990, and in most of the worlds where he was born, he never invented a movable type printing press. Most worlds didn't see a Johannes Gutenberg born in Mainz in 1400, and in those that did, he's got many fates besides becoming a famous inventor. But all the worlds do develop modern printing, and all it facilitated, and the pace of development is more or less the same. In short, possible worlds tend to converge. Now, here's the point. At the time you're living, possible worlds converge towards a shared fate. You could plot this fate from 1960 to 2160, or the corresponding dates in other calendars, and you'd get a perfect bell curve with a peak in 2060. That shared fate, human extinction. A wee cheery bit there. We're all going to die.
Right, yes, that could could have been read by a wee free minister and been more cheery. But yeah, you know, that is at the core of the book. And you know, Mike, as I said at the beginning, it's a marvelous book. And you guys that are watching this, and anybody that's watching this later on in the recording, you're in on the ground floor of one of the best books by a Scottish writer in recent years. D.D. Johnston's created, for me, a masterpiece of Scottish literature that speaks to my class, that speaks to my literary taste, and it speaks to the world. And I'll hand you over to George, who will facilitate some questions and answers from the digital floor.
Hello, everyone. I think that was pretty brilliant. And so yeah, we're just going to open the floor to some questions. Isa says, Mike, did you ever struggle with writer's block?
Yes. I started writing this in 2014. And I didn't get very far with it for many, many years. And I knew that I wanted it, and I knew sort of what I wanted to do. I realized that our culture at that moment was totally obsessed with the end of the world. And there were all these books and films that were all about the disaster and how civilization's going to end. And the weird thing about our society was that although we're so preoccupied with that fear, we were doing very little to sort of postpone it or change the direction we were going in. And I wanted to write something about that paradox. And I was stuck for so long. And there were a couple of stages that changed it. And the first thing was I was on a train down on the south coast of England, and it was February 2020, and COVID had just started to be in the news. You know, it was just starting to be dominating the headlines, and it was the weekend of, I think it was Storm Dennis, but we just had Storm Kira, and the land was flooded. And I was on this train, and everybody on the train was just staring at their phones, you know. And I thought, man, this is bleak. And there's that robot voice, you know, telling you about report anything that looks suspicious, and there's CCTV cameras. And I thought, this is how dystopian futures looked to 20th century science fiction writers. And I suddenly had this realization that my book wasn't going to be about how we would collapse into dystopia. It was going to be about how we'd get out of the dystopia we're currently in. So that was a big changing point. And after that, I got a draft finished. and you know, I got it into to Barbican, and Martin, who's a wonderful, amazing editor, partly because he's very honest. He told me to do it again. Said no. And then that summer my son was born, and that brought a new angle to it, and a new urgency to it, because all these problems in the world suddenly didn't just affect me, but they affected this wee baby. And I think that often happens with books. You can be stuck with them for a long time, and then something changes, and you suddenly move on quite quickly.
Great. Isa says, I'm also currently writing my second book, and I'm in terribly need of some great writing tips. Do you have any?
Great writing tips. Nabokov, caress the detail, the divine detail. You know, Brian was talking a wee bit about just that. You know, that's the big picture. It's all those little things. Keep concentrating on that, and just the truth, if you can. And it's really, really hard, but the truth of how you see the world is just the greatest gift that you can give your reader, because we're all so totally isolated in our own experience. We talk to other people and they tell us, well, but we've no idea what it's like to be them. And reading's one of the only ways that we can get that. So if you can try and be emotionally truthful, then I think that's incredibly valuable.
Kaylee asks a simple but huge question. What did you learn from writing this book, Mike?
I learned that I'm incredibly sentimental, that I'm unashamedly a sentimental novelist, and things like, I find out that I dwell often on the last time something happens ever, and things like that, and that I have this maybe very naive, I don't know what to call it, like just a warmth of belief in people. And I think we live in a time when there's a lot of reasons why we're afraid of each other, and a lot of our culture sort of tries to keep us afraid of each other. And I think that plays out in a lot of post-apocalyptic disaster fiction, that we're to be, your neighbors are going to kill you, you've got to be afraid. And I have this stubborn, maybe very naive, maybe very sentimental belief that actually at an individual human level, systems can be dangerous and awful, but at an individual human level, we're capable of enormous kindness. And maybe nothing is spilt in that compared to how much is written about our capacity for savagery, which of course is also there as well.
Yeah, no, I think that we've spent a lot of this session talking about kind of the kind of structural terror of the world we live in, but actually Disneyland at its heart has a lot of love. Like, this is my question, by the way, I'm jumping in. I just wanted to ask you about how you were able to make pretty much every single character so well-rounded and and the vast majority redeemable, even for their flaws.
How's it made so rounded? I think that again, Martin, there were a lot of characters that was like satirical, and that was all they were. And Martin sort of said, well, who are these people? Why are they doing these things? Give them some depth. And then I started thinking about what would make these people the way that they are. And all these characters, they're all pieces of me. You know, they might be demographically very different, but it's basically all my different human feelings put into, and there's a lot of them, so there's a lot of characters in it. All my different human feelings put into all these different people. I think of that anecdote about Gustav Flaubert when he was being asked who Madame Bovary was based upon. Someone was after the gossip, who's the real Madame Bovary? And he said, Madame Bovary. Said, well, it's me. And I think like with your characters, to an extent, they always are yourself. And thinking sympathetically about even characters that maybe aren't very glamorous, aren't very desirable. But what is their story? Why do they come up to be like that?
So the questions are flowing in, although this one isn't. Jo, who's joined the chat, just wanted to say that she really enjoyed the session, joined on a total whim, and she's very pleased that she did.
Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you very much for joining.
And James, hi James. He asks, did writing your way out of dystopia give you any hope in your own life?
Yes, it did, because there's a parallel process in terms of crisis, both in individuals' lives and in society, I think, where a moment of crisis is very often something that propels a positive change. And I think we see that socially. The great revolutions and uprisings, I admit an awful lot of them end very badly, but they also propel us forward sometimes. They tend to come about at terrible moments in the aftermaths of wars and recessions. And it's the same with your, I don't know what you call it, your personal growth, that sometimes going through a really difficult time, a time of crisis, as many of us have been in recent years and are now, that can be a stimulus to develop. And we are in a time of crisis. Someone said that something like history never appears as history while you're living through it. I mean, we'll look back on these years and be like, my goodness, what a time.
Yeah. The Sarah Walton says, thanks for the book. I was struck writing by its beauty, and the characters go through swift and deep transformation. Do you think that's possible for us as individuals?
Oh well, I mean, I can't answer that without mentioning Sarah's own book, the Silk Pavilion, which is amazing. And if you want to see as an examination of personal and social transformation, yeah, get on it. It's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I do, and I think that I mean, I can't do justice to everything that is written in that book in terms of healing from trauma and changing. But that's a go and read it.
Lewis Stanley says, did you take any inspirations from any of the works of fiction, films, and TV?
I to an extent, I was reacting against a lot of books. So there are some interesting books about the apocalypse. Interesting in the sense that they do something a little bit different. So it's not just about sort of savagery spreading. I think that like Emily Mantle's Station 11. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's a really interesting book about a post-apocalyptic world where it is kind of bleak, but there's also a real attention paid to humanity. I was interested in, I suppose, a sort of wee bit of dialogue with a very one-sided dialogue with Cormac McCarthy's The Road, because it's a book that is in some way saying some of the things that I want to say about the importance of belief and faith and stuff, but is also a sort of archetypal of the idea that there's like two good people left in the world and everybody else is a cannibal. It's a funny thing about that genre that everybody always believes that they'll stay good, the telly goes off and your neighbors will start eating each other, but you'll be civilized. It's a wee bit like if in surveys about, they ask people, are you a better than average driver? And sort of 98% of people or something like that think they're a better than average driver. So I suppose I was sort of influenced by all those books and and films, and wanted to try and take it in a wee bit of a different direction.
Sure. Rich Kemp asks, basically, how dark did you go mentally? Did you access any places, dark places personally whilst writing this book, and how did you deal with that if you did?
I think that after my son was born, it was just the tiredness. I think anyone that's got kids probably remembers what those first weeks are like, and it is it's true that I would sometimes like hallucinate, because you'd be so tired, like trying to keep this wee guy awake, and I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up like thinking that I'd fallen asleep holding him. And one time I did carry him around very carefully and lower him into his wee basket, and just as I was putting him down, I looked down and saw that he was already in the basket and there was nothing in my arms. That was really right. It was weird. And then at the same time, I'd start. I started writing the story again, and it was just like it was there. And in the book, it says that there's this voice that told it on. It sort of was like it, after all these years of being stuck with it, of having that writer's block. It was sort of like something was unlocked, and it just flowed out.
Yeah. I also have another one of my own questions. I should stop sneaking these in here. But I think one thing really striking about Disneyland is that it is properly laugh out loud hilarious. It is incredibly funny, and the comedy is really dark and absolutely horrible at points. Leans into incredibly gory at other points. And I just wanted to know, like, how, was that injection of this kind of absurdist comedy, was that something that was organic whilst you were writing?
That's one of the few bits that sort of stayed the same from when I started doing it in 2014. Was I always wanted it to be a funny book, and probably the experience of lockdown made me hungrier for that camaraderie, for that social experience of laughing together. And hearing jokes, you didn't really hear jokes anymore. People share memes and, like funny things, funny pictures they've seen on the internet, and you get them on your phone. But it's not very often these days that someone says, right, here's one for you. Wait till you hear this, and tells you a joke. And that laughing together is so, is there anything better for the human spirit than sharing a laugh?
Yeah. So Kaylee actually kind of asks a modified version of my question, but I think it kind of will help you elaborate. Is this kind of comedy like a natural thing in all your writing, or was this something particularly for Disneyland because of it kind of being so apocalyptic? It was kind of a tool to make it less so doom and gloom.
I think that probably all my books have a comic element. I think that someone once said to me that everything I wrote was about pathos, like that there's always something big going on and then something silly undercuts it. And I think that's how I see the world. Maybe that I didn't take it too seriously, or that it's so enormously serious and yet simultaneously so daft and silly. And you've sort of got to laugh at it, haven't you?
Yeah. Kaylee asks, best question, ask it on the call, I think. Have you got the seed of your next book going?
Absolutely not. Never again. I'm done. Finished. I don't do that no more. No, it took such a long time, and it was such a struggle in many ways that I'm sure there'll be, I'm sure I'll inflict another book on the world at some point, but don't fear, it's no coming anytime soon.
Sarah said, I don't believe you. So Robert asks, and you may choose to say no comment to this. It's very careful. Did the book always have the same ending with no spoilers?
No, I didn't think it did. No, it didn't. But I can't remember exactly when it did go. But I was saying to someone earlier that if I do write anything else, I'm just going to use the same ending for everything, because it's quite a nice way to ensure you didn't have to write any more pages.
I mean, yeah. All I'll say is yes.
I've got a question if I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. Martin here again. A question about your writing process and characters. I'm thinking about sort of Donna, who's the single mum at the beginning in a sort of a no-hope job, and then Giorgio, who's running the Lord of the Fries, you know, in every way he can, trying to make a success of this big chip fryer. But obviously those things aren't going to work when there's a complete energy blackout and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And then, you know, Donna and Giorgio's lives kind of revolve around each other. And I wonder how much of your writing process is about caring for your characters and trying to find a way for them to get through. I mean, there's elements of romance come into this book in this unlikely scenario. So how much of this process of you is staying awake at night trying to care for your people and finding a way through?
I think I love them, you know, like in a weird way, and I love them because they're so flawed and messed up. And as I say, you know, I suppose they are to an, you know, characters are, I think, to an extent, a reflection of the author. And I just feel that kindness, and I want things to work out for them most of the time. There's a couple of real villains in the book, but mostly I want them to work out. So caring for them, it sounds a strange thing to say because I just made up, but I probably do.
Chloe Phillips says, congratulations on the book, no questions, but I hope to see you in UOG lectures come September, Mike.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Could we maybe end with a final reading from the book?
Aye, okay. Well, you just mentioned you just mentioned Donna and Avon. This is a wee bit from. It's all. This is the night that the power goes off, and they've been having these power cuts on and off. But this one, it's actually just going to go off and never come back on again. And in this last day of electricity, Donna's been trying to get milk. That's what she's been up to, where it's success. Anyways, Ava's crept into the wee kitchen and she's like, "Did you get milk then?" "Nah, they were sold out." "But you got wine." "Breathe," thinks Donna. Ava's like, "Why did you get wine when we can't afford food?" "We can afford. Mr. Ashraf gave me the wine as like compensation because there wasn't any milk." "That's a lie, Donna. It's not even a good lie. It's not even believable." A year back, without explanation, Ava started using Donna's Christian name. It minds Donna of a breakup when an ex-lover comes to collect his things, and so as not to give her false hope. He pointedly calls her Donna rather than using whatever pet name once created the illusion of intimacy. Donna counts 3 deep breaths. She reads February's slogan on her motivational calendar, then she lifts the page, curious to ken what March will bring. The difference between thought and reality is action. Deep breaths. She's the author of her own story. "You're no good at planning," says Ava. "God, think of all the things that would be useful for the next power cut. Like a torch. Do we have a torch?" "You minding I've got my meeting," says Donna. "This is why we didn't have a car," says Ava. "It's so stupid." "Are you wanting me to put your pizza in the new?" "Ah, no," says Ava in a voice too old for her. She shakes her head and casts a look towards some imaginary adult in the front room, both of them, Ava and the imaginary adult, wryly sharing their despair at Donna's inadequacies. "Suit yourself," says Donna. "Right, I'll be in my room. Call me if you need anything, aye?" And then she goes through the hall, shoves her bedroom door, and without even thinking about it, like it's the simplest thing in the world, she flicks on the light. I imagine she kens that this is the last time she'll ever turn a light on in the home. She would pause to memorialise the moment. She'd whisper a wee commemoration. But is that no just the way? Last times so often pass unnoticed. You mind your first kiss, but how will you ken to honour your last?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Emmy Summers says, congrats on the book, Mike. This was fab. Makes me miss your lectures.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you very, very much. Massive thank you to everyone again. It's very, very, very kind of you all to give up your time on such a beautiful day, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you all very much for coming. Please do not only read this book and then share it. If you read it, you're going to want to share it because it is powerful and it's enormous. If anybody there from Edinburgh, Mike is going to be appearing the Blackwell's on the South Bridge is that the 25th of August?
Aye.
And that's a whole evening of dystopia. And just look forward to this book stirring into the future and moving lives. It is a book to cherish. So thanks all for turning up, and thanks George, and thanks Brian. It's wonderful questions and really warm appreciation. It was great to have you there, and a lovely Scottish launch for a truly memorable book. So have a great summer, the rest of you, and slot Disneyland into it whenever you can. Bye bye.